What kind of judge laughs at a crying veteran? A man who's never worn the uniform. A man who's never felt the weight of a 70-pound pack in 110-degree heat. A man who's never had to write a final letter to his family before a mission. In a Texas courtroom, one decorated veteran stood to defend not himself, but the brothers he lost. And the judge mocked his tears. But then someone walked in, someone who would change everything. This isn't just a courtroom drama. It's a story about honor, sacrifice, and what it means to keep a promise. And before it ends, even the judge will stand corrected. If you're watching this from the beginning, type "still watching" in the comments to show support for our veterans. Because no one who serves this country should ever be mocked for the scars they carry home. The ceiling fans turned slowly in the Travis County Courthouse, doing little to break the thick, humid air of a Texas summer morning. The worn oak benches creaked under the shifting weight of citizens waiting for their cases. Some resigned, some defiant, some just plain exhausted. The air carried a stale scent of old wood, ink, and anxiety. At the defendant's table sat Eli Turner, 41, a veteran of 3 tours in Afghanistan. His once broad shoulders now slumped beneath a second-hand jacket. His dress shirt, though clean, hung loosely from a frame thinned by stress and sleepless nights. The sharp lines of a military haircut had long since grown out, but the rigid posture still clung to him like instinct, at least until the pain in his left leg made him shift uncomfortably. His hands, calloused and scarred, twitched on the table. Nerves, trauma, or maybe both. His eyes, hollow and ringed with fatigue, scanned the room like a soldier scanning a perimeter. Not out of fear, out of habit. Behind him, a few older men in faded caps embroidered with Vietnam, Desert Storm, and OIF sat quietly, their presence as steady and silent as sentinels. They knew what this moment meant, not just for Eli, but for every man and woman who came home different from how they left. Judge Mason Whitmore entered the room, robes flowing like he fancied himself royalty. The bailiff announced the case in a flat tone. Case 307B, State of Texas versus Eli Turner. Charges, trespassing and disorderly conduct. Whitmore adjusted his glasses and looked over the room with all the warmth of a winter wind. Eli rose with effort, his left leg stiff, his back straight. Beside him stood Sarah Lim, a public defender barely 2 years out of law school. She spoke clearly and confidently despite the judge's reputation. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty. Mr. Turner is a decorated veteran who—" "Miss Lim," Judge Whitmore interrupted with a sigh, "this court doesn't offer discounts for past occupations. The law is the law. Let's not waste time with emotional appeals." Eli said nothing. Not yet. But when Sarah tried again, this time to explain Eli's PTSD diagnosis, his community work, the reason behind his peaceful protest, Whitmore waved her off. "Everyone's got problems, counselor. Some just don't make them other people's business." Eli's voice, low and shaky, finally broke the silence. "I wasn't asking for sympathy, sir. I just wanted him to look me in the eye and explain why he broke his promise. 22 veterans die by suicide every day. I've buried 4 friends already." And then it happened. Eli's voice cracked. Tears welled up in his eyes and began to fall. For a moment, the room froze. Then Judge Whitmore chuckled. "Mr. Turner, save the theatrics for the next parade. This is a courtroom, not a therapy session." Gasps echoed. One elderly man in the gallery clenched his jaw. Another quietly removed his cap and held it in his lap, out of respect. And somewhere deep inside that courtroom, something began to shift. Not loud, not visible, yet. But a reckoning was coming. The sound of Judge Whitmore's derisive laughter still hung in the air, like the echo of something sacred being broken. Eli lowered his eyes, trying to pull the emotion back inside. But it was too late. The dam had cracked. His tears weren't just for himself, they were for the promises broken, the men and women gone too soon, and the crushing silence that followed them home. Sarah clenched her fists. She had heard stories about Judge Whitmore's reputation, but nothing had prepared her for this cruelty parading as justice. She leaned toward Eli, her voice firm but soft. "Mr. Turner, I'd like to call a witness, someone who can speak to your service and your character." Eli turned to her, confused. Who? You'll see, she whispered. With permission from the judge, granted only after a dramatic sigh and a dismissive wave, Sarah strode to the double doors at the back of the courtroom and opened them wide. For a moment, the hallway beyond looked empty. Then a figure stood out forward. The courtroom grew still as the man entered. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a formal military uniform, adorned with medals that shimmered under the ceiling lights. His every step echoed, one heavy boot, one quiet clink of metal. The room collectively realized he had a prosthetic leg. Colonel Anthony Reeves, some gasped, others straightened in their seats. And Eli? Eli's jaw went slack. He hadn't seen his former commanding officer since the day a roadside bomb ripped through their convoy near Kandahar. Reeves approached the witness stand with a slow, deliberate pace, like every step was a reminder that he was still here, that someone had made sure he got out alive. I do, he said, voice firm, when sworn in. Sarah stepped forward, now bolstered by the presence of someone who carried gravitas not even Whitmore could ignore. Colonel Reeves, can you tell the court your relationship to the defendant, Eli Turner? He looked straight at Eli. Staff Sergeant Turner served under my command during 2 deployments in Afghanistan. He was one of the best soldiers I've ever had the privilege of leading. He paused, composing himself. On March 3, 2015, our convoy was ambushed. An IED took out the lead vehicle. We lost 3 men instantly. I was in the second vehicle, trapped, my leg crushed, fire spreading fast. Turner was already injured, but he ran through gunfire to pull me out, carried me nearly half a mile to extraction. The room was silent. Even Whitmore had stopped fidgeting with his pen. I lost my leg, Reeves said, but I kept my life because of that man sitting over there. Eli's hands trembled again, but not from fear, from memory. Reeves wasn't finished. Since returning, Turner has organized peer support for veterans in this very county, out of his own pocket. No grants, no glory, just a folding table, some chairs, and coffee from the dollar store. He turned to Judge Whitmore now, his gaze narrowing. And now he's on trial. For what? Holding a sign? Posing for the truth from a man who broke his word? Whitmore opened his mouth as if to respond, but the door at the back creaked again. Another figure appeared, shorter, in a sharp navy blue suit, silver hair, recognizable face. Senator Allen Brooks. A shocked murmur swept the courtroom. He hadn't been summoned. He wasn't expected. Yet here he was, quietly taking a seat in the back, perhaps hoping to observe anonymously. But Sarah saw him, and so did Eli. Her voice rang out. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to call witness, a man whose broken promise brought us here. Judge Whitmore's face stiffened. Senator Brooks, please approach the stand. The silence in the Travis County courtroom was suffocating. All eyes had turned to the man now frozen near the back. Senator Allen Brooks, dressed in a tailored navy suit, his polished shoes at odds with the dusty floor beneath him. He hadn't expected to be seen, let alone summoned, but Sarah Lim's voice had cut through the air like a blade. Your Honor, the defense requests Senator Brooks be called as a witness. His involvement is central to Mr. Turner's motives. Judge Whitmore adjusted his glasses, his expression hardening. Senator Brooks is not on the list of witnesses. This is highly irregular. Sarah stepped forward with unflinching resolve. So was Mr. Turner's arrest, Your Honor. If the court wants to understand his intent, we must examine what led him there. Context, sir, it matters. The judge stared at her, then shifted his gaze to Brooks. After a long pause, he exhaled slowly. Very well. Senator Brooks, if you would. Brooks rose reluctantly, smoothing the front of his suit. His steps to the stand were slow, measured. As he was sworn in, his jaw tightened. He avoided eye contact with Eli. Sarah approached with the calm of someone holding a hidden ace. Senator, did you meet with Mr. Turner and other veterans in this county earlier this year? Yes, Brooks replied curtly. I meet with constituents regularly. During that meeting, did you tell them you supported the Veteran Mental Health Bill, House Resolution 718? Brooks hesitated. I told them I was considering supporting it. Colonel Reeves shifted in his seat. Sarah didn't look away. Let me refresh your memory. There were 8 veterans in that room. I have a signed letter addressed to Mr. Turner from your office. dated February 8th. It reads, "You can count on my support for HR 718. Our veterans deserve better." Would you like me to read it aloud? Brooks sighed. "Sibanhan." That letter, tell you, was sent prematurely. There were political developments. Political developments, she repeated slowly. Do those developments include campaign donations from the pharmaceutical lobby opposing the bill's funding redirection? A ripple of gasps flowed through the room. Judge Whitmore banged his gavel. "Counselor, watch your tone." Sarah turned toward the bench. "My tone is rooted in facts, Your Honor." Mr. Turner stood outside Senator Brooks's home with a handmade sign. He didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't cross any lines. He asked for an explanation, for truth. And now he's here on trial. She turned back to Brooks. "Senator, why didn't you respond to his calls or letters?" Brooks's jaw worked for a moment before he answered. "I didn't believe a sidewalk protest warranted a personal response." That was the moment. In the front row, one of the older veterans removed his glasses and wept openly. Eli stared down at his hands, breathing deeply. His fingers curled slightly, as if gripping invisible soil. The courtroom had become more than a legal arena. It was now a battlefield of truth versus power. Then another voice spoke. "I was at that meeting too." All heads turned. A woman in her 60s stood at the back. She wore a jacket with a gold Army mom pin. She stepped forward cautiously. "My son was in that room when you made that promise," she said to Brooks. "He took you at your word. 2 weeks ago, he took his life." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she covered her mouth. The courtroom went still. Judge Whitmore didn't reach for the gavel this time. Brooks looked stricken, but said nothing. Colonel Reeves finally rose again. "Permission to address the court, Your Honor." Whitmore nodded. Reeves turned to the room. "We're not asking this court to ignore the law. We're asking it to see beyond the charge sheet, to see the people, the pain, the promise it made and broken." Then slowly he turned to Brooks. "You looked us in the eyes, Senator. We believed you. We trusted you. But now a good man is on trial for standing up, not just for himself, but for all of us." Sarah stepped back, letting the weight of the moment settle. The judge sat quietly for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he called a recess and left the courtroom. As people stood to stretch or whisper among themselves, Eli remained seated. Colonel Reeves placed a hand on his shoulder. "You held the line, Turner," he said. "Sometimes holding the line doesn't look like it used to. Sometimes it's this." Eli nodded slowly. He still didn't understand how it had come to this. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. The sound of the gavel had faded, but the room didn't move. Even with the judge gone to chambers, no one dared speak above a whisper. The air felt different now, heavier, more solemn. Eli sat in stunned silence, staring at the grain of the wood table before him. His thoughts raced in 1,000 directions. All those sleepless nights, all those unanswered emails, all those funerals. Sarah leaned over, her voice gentle. "You did good." Eli didn't respond, not yet. At the back of the courtroom, the door creaked open again. Heads turned, expecting perhaps the bailiff or a clerk. But what entered was something else entirely. A woman in her 40s pushed a wheelchair into the room. Sitting in that chair was a man many of the older veterans immediately recognized. Even those who had never met him seemed to know his face, etched into photographs, war memorials, and the kind of stories told with misty eyes over black coffee. Major General Luther Whitmore, the father of the judge, a World War II veteran. Normandy, Battle of the Bulge. A soldier. He wore a cap adorned with pins from 3 different wars, his uniform crisp even in old age. His hands, spotted with time and veined with history, rested calmly on the arms of his wheelchair. When Eli saw him, he stood slowly, painfully, without being told. So did Colonel Reeves. The room followed, row by row. Even Senator Brooks rose. The woman pushing the chair whispered something to the bailiff, who disappeared behind the judge's door. Minutes later, Judge Mason Whitmore returned, his brow furrowed, only to freeze when he saw his father at the front of the room. His voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. "Dad, what are you doing here?" The old general looked at his son without blinking. "I came to see for myself." "This isn't procedure," Mason began. his voice trying to reclaim control. This is a disgrace, his father interrupted. That's what it is. The room went still again. You raised me to follow the law, Mason said, glancing at the gallery as if seeking support. I raised you to know right from wrong, the general replied. They're not always the same thing. Mason's jaw clenched. I fought on Omaha Beach. I've seen what this country asks of its sons. I've watched them die crying for their mothers or for the men beside them. And I came home hoping that one day we'd honor them the way they deserve. He gestured toward Eli. That man? He didn't disgrace this court. You did. Mason opened his mouth, then shut it again. Richard, the general said, his voice growing softer. When you were a boy, you used to salute my uniform with pride. You said you wanted to be a man of honor. I became a judge, Mason said quietly. I thought I was serving. Then serve now, his father replied. Not your ego, not the politics of your bench. Serve justice. Sarah felt her breath catch. In all her young career, she had never seen a moment so raw. Judge Whitmore turned to Eli. What do you want from me? He asked, voice no longer commanding, but human. Eli looked up, eyes glistening. I don't want anything for myself, sir. I want you to understand why I stood on that sidewalk. I want you to understand that a promise broken by a leader can break more than trust. It can break lives. I wanted an answer, and I wanted the next man who walks through hell with a rifle in his hand to know we haven't forgotten him. The judge turned toward the gallery. Dozens of veterans stared back, some with hats in hand, some with prosthetic limbs, all with stories behind their eyes. He looked back at his father, who nodded once, and that single nod carried the weight of generations. Judge Whitmore called the courtroom back to order. I need 15 minutes, he said. This court is in recess. And with that, he left the bench again, but not before glancing back at Eli, a glance that didn't carry the usual superiority. This time, it was something closer to respect. As the room slowly began to exhale, Sarah whispered to Eli, He heard you. No, Eli said softly. He heard all of us. And for the first time since the charges were filed, he believed something might actually change. The courtroom was quieter than it had been all morning. The veterans sat still, their hats resting in their laps, back straight, not out of formality, but from shared history. The weight in the air wasn't tension anymore. It was reverence. The kind of stillness that only happens when something bigger than justice is unfolding. When Judge Whitmore returned to the bench, he looked like a man who had aged 5 years and 15 minutes. His usual rigid posture was replaced with something more human, something worn but sincere. His father's words clearly lingered with him like a hymn he couldn't forget. I'd like to hear from the defendant, he said finally. In his own words. Eli took a slow breath and stood. His bad leg gave a little, but he didn't show pain. Not today. He faced the judge, but also the room. My name is Eli Turner. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan. I don't list that for sympathy. I say it because over there we live by one rule. We don't leave anyone behind. He paused, scanning the room. Combat's one thing, but coming home, his voice softened. Coming home's the real war. He looked down at his hands, then back up. When I got back, I couldn't sleep. Couldn't sit in a restaurant with Baruch checking every exit. Couldn't watch fireworks without seeing firebombs. But worse than all of that was the silence. The feeling that nobody understood. That what we did didn't matter. Eli's voice grew steadier. So I made a promise. Right there, in the back of a medevac helicopter, holding my best friend as he died in my arms. I promised him I'd look after the others who made it home. That I'd make sure they got what they needed, even if I didn't. The judge shifted in his seat. Eli continued. When Senator Brooks looked me in the eye and said he'd vote for the veteran mental health bill, I believed him, and I told the guys in my support group that help was coming, that maybe, just maybe, we weren't forgotten. He paused, fighting back emotion, and then he changed his vote. No explanation, no phone call, no answer, just silence. He turned briefly to look at the senator, then back to the judge. I didn't go to his house to yell or threaten. I stood on the sidewalk with a cardboard sign that read, Keep your promise. Veterans are dying waiting. That's not a crime. That's a cry for help. Eli's voice trembled but didn't break. "I'm not asking to be let off. I'm not above the law. But I am asking that you see me and others like me not as broken men, but as men who still believe in something. Men who keep promises, even when it hurts." The courtroom was still. Even Senator Brooks couldn't meet Eli's gaze. Sarah stepped forward, handing the judge a stack of letters. "These," she said, "are from local veterans who credit Mr. Turner with saving their lives through his peer support group. Some of them are here today." The judge took the folder. As he flipped through the handwritten pages, the silence grew heavier, more sacred. Then a small voice came from the back. "Your Honor?" Everyone turned. A young boy, no more than 12, stood beside his grandmother. He wore a t-shirt too big for him that read, "My grandpa is a hero." His voice wavered, but he spoke anyway. "My dad said Eli helped him stop drinking. He used to yell a lot, but now he comes to my games." The judge looked at the boy, then to Eli. The gavel didn't come down. Not yet. Instead, the judge leaned forward. "Mr. Turner, what would you do if given another chance?" Eli's answer was simple. "I'd keep the promise, same as always." There was nothing dramatic in his tone. No anger, no entitlement. Just the quiet certainty of a man who had seen too much and still chose to serve. And in that moment, something inside the judge finally shifted. Not because of fear, not because of politics, but because he remembered the sound of his father's boots at the front door, the weight of medals passed down in velvet boxes, the pride of saluting that old uniform on Sunday mornings before church, and he remembered what honor looked like. It looked a lot like Eli Turner. The judge's chair creaked as Mason Whitmore sat back, eyes still fixed on Eli. The letters in his hand trembled slightly, not from age, but from the realization that somewhere along the way, he had stopped listening to the people that justice was meant to protect. He cleared his throat, setting the folder down carefully, as though it held something sacred, which, in many ways, it did. "This court has reviewed the facts," he began, voice steadier than expected. "Mr. Turner, you did enter private property, even if only the sidewalk. By law, that qualifies as trespassing." Eli's shoulders tensed, not in fear, but in resolve. The judge continued. "However, the purpose of sentencing is not just punishment. It is correction, restoration, and sometimes acknowledgement." He paused, glancing at the front row where his father sat, still upright in his wheelchair, his decorated cap resting on his lap. "When I took this bench years ago, I thought the law was black and white. I now understand that justice lives in the gray, in context, in intent, in truth." The room held its collective breath. "Therefore," he said, looking back at Eli, "I am sentencing you to 6 months of probation with 100 hours of community service." The gallery stirred, a wave of quiet relief rippling across the pews. But the judge wasn't done. "That community service," Rana, he added, "is to be fulfilled by continuing your peer support group for veterans. Effective immediately, this court recognizes the Stand Together Project as an official alternative sentencing program under Travis County jurisdiction." Eli blinked, unsure he had heard correctly. Sarah's hand found his arm, steadying him. The judge leaned forward slightly. "You will receive assistance from a case coordinator, a licensed counselor, and, if you're willing, my full endorsement in seeking nonprofit status for your organization." Eli's jaw moved, but no words came out. The judge turned to the gallery. "Furthermore," he continued, his voice firm, "this court encourages Senator Brooks to meet with Mr. Turner and other local veterans in good faith to revisit the Veterans Mental Health Bill." Brooks, caught off guard, nodded slowly, an unspoken acknowledgement that something deeper than politics had just unfolded here. Mason Whitmore raised the gavel, then paused. "One more thing," he said. "I've authorized a personal donation of $10,000 to support the Stand Together Project. I would ask that anyone in this courtroom who has the means consider doing the same." The gavel fell. Case closed. The courtroom didn't erupt in cheers. It didn't need to. The silence that followed was louder than any applause. Eli stood slowly, still absorbing what had just happened. Sarah hugged him briefly, whispering, "You did more than win a case. You changed the conversation." As people began to file out, many stopped to shake Eli's hand. Some simply nodded, their eyes saying what words couldn't. Judge Whitmore stepped down from the bench. He moved toward his father, pausing beside the old general's wheelchair. "You were right, Dad," he said quietly. "I lost sight of what matters." Luther Whitmore looked at his son, not with judgment, but something closer to peace. "Justice isn't just a verdict, Richard," the general replied. "It's how you carry it when the robe comes off." The two men stood in quiet understanding. A bridge had been rebuilt, one weathered by decades but never truly destroyed. Eli was making his way toward the exit when a young veteran approached, nervously. "Mr. Turner, I've been going to your meetings for a few weeks. I just wanted to say, thanks. You made me feel human again." Eli placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "You are," he said. "Don't forget that." As Eli stepped outside into the Texas afternoon sun, he paused on the courthouse steps. The heat hit him, but it didn't weigh him down. Not today. He looked back at the building, not with resentment, but with something closer to reverence. This wasn't the place that judged him anymore. It had become the place where something began. From the sidewalk, he could see two men shaking hands, Judge Whitmore and Colonel Reeves. And behind them, his father, Major General Luther Whitmore, watching it all with a tired but satisfied smile. Eli took one more breath of thick Texas air and stepped forward, not away from the courthouse, but toward what came next. 6 months had passed since the day Eli Turner stood in that courtroom, trembling, not from guilt, but from the weight of a promise. Now, a large crowd gathered under a late autumn Texas sky, veterans in uniform, mothers with folded flags in their hands, children clutching posters of loved ones in service. Camera crews from local and national outlets lined the sidewalk as the Travis County Veterans Resilience Center was officially opened. A new building, brick and glass, with soft edges and open light, a different kind of battleground, one built for healing. At the center of the ceremony stood Eli. His hair was a little shorter now, his posture a little straighter. The pain in his leg hadn't gone away, but there was a steadiness in his gait, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. To his right stood Colonel Reeves, now serving as the center's director, a role he accepted with pride and deep purpose. To his left, Judge Mason Whitmore, dressed not in robes but in a gray suit, hands folded in front of him with the humility of a man who had learned to listen. And sitting front row, beneath a canopy decorated with American flags and handmade signs that read, "Veterans Deserve More," was Major General Luther Whitmore, the man whose voice had rekindled a courtroom's conscience. As the ribbon was cut, a cheer rose, not loud or wild, but steady, like the heartbeat of a community waking up. Eli stepped to the podium. He looked out at the crowd, not as a defendant, not even as a soldier, but as a man who had kept a promise and watched it become something more. "When I came home," he began, "I brought something back with me, and I don't just mean scars or memories. I brought back a responsibility. One I made in a helicopter soaked with blood, holding the hand of my best friend who didn't make it." He paused, his voice steady but rich with emotion. "I promised him I'd do right by the ones who did make it, that I'd stand in the gap where systems failed, and I thought maybe I'd just do it quietly, one person at a time." He looked around. "I didn't know it would lead to this. I didn't know it would lead to all of you." Applause swelled, respectful and strong. He continued, "This place isn't just about therapy rooms or filing VA paperwork. It's about connection. It's about not having to explain why you sleep with a light on or why fireworks make your hands sweat. It's about belonging." He looked directly at the young veteran in the crowd who had once thanked him outside the courtroom. "And most of all, it's about hope, not the empty kind, the earned kind." He stepped back, and the podium was filled by Colonel Reeves, who spoke briefly before handing the mic to Judge Whitmore. The judge hesitated before speaking, not from nerves, but from the understanding that every word had to matter. "There was a time when I thought justice meant only following the letter of the law, that doing so made me a good man," he said. He glanced at his father in the front row. "I've since learned that justice also means understanding the heart behind the law, the context, the humanity." He looked at Eli. "I thank God that man walked into my courtroom that day. And I thank my father for reminding me of the man I used to want to be. As the crowd applauded, Whitmore did something unexpected. He stepped down and embraced Eli, not for show, but for gratitude. Later that afternoon, as guests mingled through the news center, veterans registered for programs ranging from trauma counseling to job training. A former Marine who had been living in his truck filled out housing assistance paperwork. A young woman, an Army medic, sat beside a volunteer counselor, finally ready to talk about her nightmares. In a quiet corner, Eli sat with Sarah Lim. She still volunteered every Saturday, offering legal help to vets facing minor offenses linked to PTSD, addiction, or homelessness. "You realize," she said with a grin, "you're becoming a symbol." Eli chuckled. "God help us." "No, seriously," she continued, "you lit a fire. Judges across Texas are asking about veterans court alternatives. Other counties want to replicate this model. It's spreading." He nodded, humbled. "I just wanted to keep a promise." Sarah raised her coffee cup in salute. "Well, you did." As the sun began to set behind the Texas hills, Eli stepped outside for a moment. The late breeze carried the scent of barbecue from a food truck parked out front and the sound of kids laughing in the courtyard. His phone buzzed. Veteran crisis line. One new call. Eli didn't hesitate. "Turner here," he answered. "Yeah, I'm listening. You're not alone, brother. I've been where you are." He sat down on the bench outside the center as the last light of day kissed the brick facade behind him. "And I promise you, things can get better. Just don't hang up." And somewhere across the line, a life held on. The stars had begun to flicker above the Travis County Veterans Resilience Center, each one whispering reminders of names and faces that never made it home. The building's soft exterior lighting bathed the front walk in a warm amber glow. It no longer looked like an institution. It looked like sanctuary. Eli Turner sat on a bench near the entrance, phone still pressed to his ear. On the other end was a man in his 30s, voice barely audible, broken with tears and fatigue. A man lost in the dark, searching for someone, anyone, to remind him that morning was worth reaching. Eli listened, not to reply, not to fix, just to be there. When the voice cracked into silence, Eli spoke softly. "I know it feels like you're carrying too much, but let me tell you something, brother. You're not meant to carry it alone." There was a long pause on the line, then, "Thank you." They spoke for 15 more minutes. When the call ended, Eli didn't move for a while. The night was quiet, but his heart was full of memory, of grief, of purpose. Inside, volunteers were cleaning up. Someone turned off the coffee machine. A veteran in a wheelchair nodded as he passed by the window, raising 2 fingers in a casual salute. Eli looked up at the sky. "I kept my promise, Marcus," he whispered, "and I'm not done yet." He stood slowly, leg aching, and walked toward the front door. As he reached for the handle, he turned back one more time to take in the view. The community, the building, the change that had unfolded not through rage or revenge, but through something much harder. Courage, and staying when it hurt. Justice doesn't always happen in courtrooms. Sometimes it happens when one person refuses to stay silent. Sometimes it begins with a cardboard sign and ends with a community healed. Eli Turner didn't set out to become a leader. He just wanted the truth. But in choosing to stand for others, he reminded us all that the most powerful kind of service doesn't end with a discharge date. It continues in quiet conversations, shared burdens, and unwavering loyalty. So if you're still watching this story and it moved you even a little, drop a comment below. I stand with our veterans. Let their stories live. Let their struggles be seen. Let their promises be honored. And if you know a veteran who's struggling, don't wait. Call, visit, sit with them. Sometimes all it takes to save a life is simply showing up. Because at the end of the day, justice wears many faces. A judge, a soldier, a father, a friend. And if we truly care about the country we wave flags for, then we must never forget the people who carried it on their backs. No one who serves should ever feel alone.